Hey guys, and welcome back to Z3 Cubing. Today I'm going to show you my best solves from Colorado Qualifier 2019. So last weekend I was at a pretty big 2-day competition, Colorado Qualifier 2019. They held all 18 events. I competed in all but 2 of them, so 16 events. I made it to the second round of many of those events, so that's well over 100 solves. So today I want to go through every event individually, talk about what my goals were for those events, talk about the times that I actually got, and how I did at the competition overall. So let's get started. First off, with 2x2, it's not really an event that I care about at all. I figured if I got lucky with the scrambles, I might be able to beat my official average of 4.66, but I wasn't really too confident. But I wound up actually getting a PB single of 3.14, which you're seeing here, as well as a PB average of 4.46, so I was pretty happy with that. I think through practicing other events, I've somehow gotten better at 2x2 also. Anyway, that average got me to the second round, where I didn't do nearly as well. My best single here, a 4.8, wasn't even as good as my average in the previous round, and I wound up in 21st place that round, so I didn't make it to finals. Next up, 3x3 is one of the events I was really excited for this competition because I've been practicing it quite a bit, and I really wanted to beat that PB average of 14.9. In the first round here, you see I got an 11.98 single pretty early on, which I was really excited about. That's my PB single in competition. Unfortunately though, my camera wasn't recording, and so instead you're watching that 18.41 terrible single that I got later. I think I messed up the cross and last layer a bunch, and overall the average wasn't that great because I had a couple solves where I just messed things up. Anyway, that 16-second average was easily good enough to make it to round 2, and during that round I started off really consistent. My first 4 solves were 14, 14, 14, and 27, don't ask about that one. And then on the last solve, I was able to get a 13.2, which was a pretty good time, less than all the other ones, and I wound up with an average of 14.74, which did beat my official PB average at the time. Unfortunately though, I only got 18th place in that round, so I barely didn't make it to the finals. 4x4 was also another event that I was very excited for because I really wanted to get sub 1, which is the qualifying time for nationals. Previously my PB was 1.87 seconds, and so I was really close in last competition, and I really wanted to get under 1, and I was pretty sure I was able to do it, especially with this new cube, a lot better than my old one, and I wound up starting off doing really well. I got a 46-second solve, which I think was an overall PB at the time, which is just ridiculous, no parity, just crazy fast execution. And so even with a couple solves over a minute there, I still had a counting 50-second solve, which is really good for me, and so that got me a 56.88 average, which was a lot better than I was expecting, but it's definitely sub 1, and I'll definitely qualify for nationals. Also, that average did get me to the second round, but as will become a trend in this video, I didn't do very well. So my best single of a 58 wasn't even as good as my average in the previous round, much like 2x2, and you'll see that hold true with many other puzzles in this video later on. I just didn't do very well in my final round of each event. And so in 4x4, I wound up 26th place in the second round and didn't make it to finals. Now for 5x5, as you may know, I've been using a Yushin 5x5 for many years, which I think has been slowing me down a lot, because as soon as I got this new Angstrom 5x5, as well as the Angstrom 4x4, I suddenly got a lot faster in the event. So I figured going into the competition that I could easily beat my 205.49 official average, even getting sub 2, but I wound up doing way better than I expected. I got a 149 average, over 10 seconds faster than I thought I would do, and got a 137 single, which I think was an overall PB at the time. So I wound up doing a lot better than I thought I would in 5x5, and I think that's mostly due to the cube. Now that average got me 15th place, barely good enough to make it to the final round, and once again I got a much slower average of a 201 with a 155 as my best solve, not even as good as my average in the previous round. Most of these rounds where I didn't do very well all took place like back to back on Sunday afternoon when I had already been competing for a full day and a half, and I was just kind of exhausted, kind of not in the mood for solving fast anymore, but luckily I had accomplished most of my goals in previous rounds. In the only round of 6x6, I thought I had a pretty good chance at beating my official PB mean of 354, but with the cutoff of 4 minutes, there's always a chance that you mess up your first solve and not be able to complete your mean. And so in this particular round, I wound up messing up the centers, I didn't do the color scheme correctly, I wound up getting parity while pairing edges, and then parity while solving OLL, and then parity while solving PLL. 3 different parities, messed up the centers, just overall a slow solve in general. Wound up being a minute slower than I wanted to be, and I missed the cutoff and didn't get to complete a mean. In Pyraminx, I'm currently in the process of totally relearning the puzzle using a different method because the method I'm currently using isn't really working out for me, so I didn't really have any expectations for this round. I figured I'd set my goal at 534, my official PB average currently, but I figured I probably wouldn't make it, and I got a 5.77, which is actually better than I thought I would do, and I got a nice 3.62 PB single. Now in the first solve of the next round, well, this happened to me. I wound up doing the last algorithm in the wrong direction and DNFing the solve, so that was a little rough. On the next solve though, I got a 4 flat single, which is pretty good for me, but I followed that up with some pretty bad solves, 7.9 counting. So yeah, at this point I was pretty much just holding out to make it to the final round. Now yeah, luckily I still barely made it to finals with that average, and I knew I even had a slight chance of podiuming if I did really well, but unfortunately this was late Sunday afternoon. I wound up doing even worse than I had in the second round, with my best single being slower than my first average. So yeah, I wound up getting 2 8s and a 7, so that wasn't pretty. Going into my first solve in the first round of Skewb, somewhat amusingly, this happened to me. And then I went up again for real this time, and then this happened. And then I went up once again, and I guess third time's a charm because it was actually scrambled this time, and I got a 4.48 single, which is pretty nice. Overall, I wanted to beat my official PB average of 5.94, which I knew I could definitely do, and I could probably make it on the podium in the last round too. And once again, my camera decided not to record when getting a good single, so instead of watching that 4.48, you're actually watching that 19.72, which was just hilariously bad, messed up a bunch. So with the 4, a 19, and a bunch of 6s, I didn't get a very good average, but of course I made it to the second round. Okay, so going into the next round on the next day, surely the scramblers know what they're doing now. Or not. Okay, going up for a second time, I actually got a scrambled cube, and I got a nice 4.27 single, and I actually ended up getting some pretty good solves, apart from that 7, and a 5.84 average, beating my PB average officially. Now in the final round, I knew I still could improve that average further because I had been averaging in the low 5s during practice, and I started off pretty well with a 3.86 single, but wound up getting all the worst cases and getting a 6.65 average, and unfortunately not getting on the podium either. Square one was another interesting round. Having not beaten my official PB average of 33.48 for nearly 3 years now, I had absolutely no expectations for the event, so I didn't really practice for it. I knew that the cutoff for nationals this year was going down to sub 30, and I knew that I absolutely was not going to be able to get that kind of average. But anyway, I went into the round and I got a 27, 31, 26, which are like ridiculous times for me because I averaged like 40. I believe there are a couple of cube shapes that only took like 1 or 2 moves. There were a bunch of just random skips all over the place, and I don't think I got parity a single time. So that's why I got such a ridiculously good average. I actually beat my PB average, which I didn't think I was ever going to beat again, but yeah, I actually wound up with a 31.94, which is really good for me. Now, going into the competition, not even knowing if I was going to make the cutoff, I somehow found myself easily making it into the second and final round, and I knew I wasn't going to do nearly as well as the first round because I was just so lucky, but I wound up only getting like 1 or 2 parities the entire average still. So this time I ended up with a really consistent and still pretty good average for me. Lots of solves in the low to mid 30s with a 32 best single and a 34 average, still better than I thought I would do in the entire competition. Now in Megaminx, I initially didn't have any big expectations. I figured I'd shoot for my official PB average of 137 and just see what happened from there. But going into the round after doing really well in 4x4 and 5x5, which are kind of similar events for me because they take a lot of fast look ahead, I was starting to feel a lot more confident about the event. Now I did actually get some pretty decent singles that would have made for a really good average, like a 136 and the 133 you're seeing on screen here, but it was kind of hit and miss overall. Some of the solves were just really slow. I messed up look ahead a bunch and got a bunch of 140s, messed up the average overall with a 141. I did make it to the final round just because so few people were competing, and it was kind of the same thing. Like I'd get a good solve, then a bunch of really bad ones in a row. As you can see, 150, 140, 140, 140. And then finally, at the end of the average, I finally got a solve that went right for once. It wasn't like a crazy scrambler or anything. I just executed it really smoothly, like I should have been doing the entire time. And I got a 125.86 single, which is now my official PB. So at least I was able to salvage something from this event. Clock has also been pretty interesting for me recently. Going into nationals of last year, they moved the qualifying time down to 15 seconds. And I went to a competition beforehand and got a 15.74. Just barely missed it, even though I cleared the average sub 15. Going into this year, they moved the qualifying time down to 13 seconds, and so now I had to get a sub 13 average. I didn't really think that was going to happen going into the competition, but as I was practicing for the event, I started getting a bunch of sub 13 solves, so I thought I could probably do it, and I actually had a pretty good average except for 2 solves in the middle. I got a 16, which brought my average down a lot, and of course a DNF because clock is just bad. So if it weren't for those 2 solves, I definitely could have done it and qualified for nationals, but instead I just got a 14.19 average, which is still an official PB, as well as an official 11.57 PB single. Also, I got 3rd place in the event, which is just crazy. There just weren't very many good clockers at the competition, but I guess it was cool to podium in something at least. After practicing a lot of 3x3, I knew it would be very easy to beat my official PB average of 29.27 in one-handed. Unfortunately though, I got some bad solves on the first round, 33, 34, 39, and wound up with only a 27 best single, which isn't even very good for me. I probably averaged around 27 overall. Similarly, going into the second round, I was prepared to easily beat that PB average, but wound up once again getting some not so great singles, 32, 33, only got a 29.69, which was really close to the PB average, but I didn't quite get it. I did, however, get a PB single of a 25, which is pretty decent for me. But unfortunately, I ended up in 17th place at the end of that round, and so I just barely missed being able to go to finals and actually beat the average by 1 ranking. In FMC, I did terrible. To qualify for nationals, you need a sub 38 mean, and let's just say if I hadn't written one stupid move, I would have been 2nd place in the competition. 3x3 blindfolded was also a really interesting event, which I also practiced for quite a bit leading up to the competition. After getting an official successful mean of 3 at my last competition, I figured there was no point in going for accuracy, and I should just try and get as fast of a solve as possible. Also, nationals, the qualifying time was sub 3. I knew I probably wasn't going to be able to do that, but I just figured I'd try to get a really good single and see what happened. So the first solve started off pretty well, although the memorization was a little bit slow, but as soon as I put on my blindfold, I started executing totally the wrong thing, and I realized after I had executed like 4 targets, I had to undo those 4 and then start redoing the correct version of the solve, and so I wasted like probably over a minute just trying to figure out what I had done, what I had mixed up, but I still miraculously ended up with a solved cube at the end. Now everything about the second solve was just ridiculous. It wasn't a super amazing scramble, it still had like some twisted corners, but it was still really good. It had a couple of solved pieces, I think, and I just got into the memorization and everything went super smoothly. Everything just kind of stuck into my head perfectly. I got perfect memorization for everything. Got into the execution really, really fast, and just everything went super smoothly. I knew it was going to be a really fast time. Set it down, I got a 3:01, which was my overall PB single, of course, official PB single as well. And I just barely missed the nationals cutoff of 3 minutes, which was really sad. You can see in my reaction that I'm really excited when I see it solved, and then I get kind of annoyed when I see the time is just 1 second off. But anyway, that time got me 5th place, and I'm really happy with it. Now going into the last solve, I now knew I had a chance to get another successful mean of 3 in competition, and a much faster one too with that good single. And so I played the solve pretty safe. It was another pretty good scramble. I ended up once again executing it really well with a 3:37 single, making 3 official successes in a row, giving me an official PB mean of 3:57, which I'm really happy with. In 4x4 blindfolded, this was my first time competing officially after getting my first unofficial success just about a week before. Be sure and check that video out if you haven't already. So of course my goal was just to get a success under 45 minutes, which was the cutoff. So I only had 1 attempt and the solve went pretty well. The overall time it took was less than either of the unofficial attempts I had done before. And in the end, I made 1 dumb mistake on corners where I totally just forgot to execute 1 letter pair. I still had it memorized and everything, I just totally skipped over it. And also I had 4 center pieces which were just in the wrong place. It was probably something to do while I was memorizing it, just did something in the wrong order. But overall, the cube was most of the way solved. I got all the edges correct, which is usually the hardest part. So overall, I'm pretty happy with this, even though it wasn't a success. 3x3 Multiblind was another event that almost ended up really well, but not quite. I had attempted doing 2 cubes in competition before and was off by just a couple of corners. I'd done it many times at home, I know that I can do it, and going to the competition I was really confident. The memorization was totally accurate and ended up pretty fast, and the execution was going pretty well. I solved 1 cube totally correctly until I got to the corners at the very end of the last cube. I did the setup moves for a target correctly, but then somehow, since I wasn't paying attention, the thought crossed my mind that I had actually done it incorrectly in a different way, and so I undid those incorrect moves that I actually hadn't done in the first place and then redid it the correct way. And so that basically translated to me doing 4 random moves in the middle of my solve, which obviously doesn't really work out, and in the end it wound up being a DNF. So if it weren't for me kind of second guessing myself in the middle there, it would have been a success, but unfortunately we have to wait until the next competition. Now finally it's time for everyone's favorite event, 3x3 with feet. Now I'm putting this at the end of the video so you don't have to watch it if you don't want to. You're not going to miss anything afterwards. Anyway, for this event, I think this is the first time I've actually practiced this before a competition. And in addition to my improvements in 3x3 recently, I actually got quite a lot faster than my previous official PB average of 251. And I knew I could easily get sub 2. I was averaging around 140 in practice. Unfortunately, on some solves, it's just kind of slow if you have to do like 4 like last layer. It really just depends on the case you get for OL and PLL. And so I got a lot of really bad cases. I got like an N perm and things like that on some of these solves. Anyway, I still ended up with a 2 flat average, which is practically sub 2. I mean, I'll get a better one on my next competition. I also got a 130 official PB single, which is pretty good for me too. Now the best part about feet as an event is I actually got 3rd place overall at the competition. So over the weekend, in the end, I got podiums in feet and clock. Everyone's 2 favorite events. So that is it for all the events I competed in at Colorado Qualifier 2019. It was a really fun competition. I'm really glad I was able to go and compete in so many rounds of so many different events. Overall, I'm really happy with how I did in all these different events. Got lots of different PBs in pretty much everything. I also qualified for nationals in 4x4, which I'm pretty happy about. And I guess that's pretty much the entire premise of the competition anyway, being Colorado Qualifier. Although unfortunately, I didn't qualify for 5x5 or Square 1 or Megaminx or Clock or Fewest Moves or Blindfolded. But anyway, it was still a pretty good competition overall. And that's pretty much it for this video. I'll see you guys next time.